Early 1981, the Sears mailroom in Chicago ran on one religion: keep the line moving. Under fluorescent lights, paper dust floated like ash. The scale needle was Linda's metronome. Lift, set, settle, stamp, initial, slide. She'd weighed thousands of catalogs without thinking, until one battered book made the needle hesitate. Not enough to trigger a supervisor, just enough to make her feel it in her fingertips. The cover squeaked dry, wrong. The spine resisted like it had a secret it refused to bend around. And when she leaned in, the smell hit her sharp, chemical, nothing, like ink or paper. Rubber cement. Uncapped. Recent. The address label looked normal. A P.O. box. A zip code. Clean black type. But the label was too new for the cover it clung to. Fresh corners stuck onto a spine worn soft by hands, like someone had dressed the same book in a clean shirt and sent it back out. Linda wrote the weight anyway because stopping the line was how you got noticed. And in that room, being noticed was how you lost your job. The next morning, Linda clocked in and went straight to the bulletin board. The overtime sheet was there, but her name wasn't. The room didn't pause for that. Sacks still had to move. Labels still had to stick. She washed her hands in the tiny restroom sink because the catalog dust clung to skin like flour. Then she pulled a canvas apron from the hook and took her place at the scale. The normal in that mailroom was loud and physical. Rubber rollers on the label machine. Staples snapping in the return station. A wire cart squealing every time someone turned it too tight. Linda's job was simple on paper. Match the address plate to the route. Stamp the slip. Initial the line. It only stayed simple if nobody asked questions. A Sears catalog had a life before it reached her. Some came straight from print runs, sharp corners, tight spines. Others came back first returns, customer swaps, mail held too long, then got re-entered into outbound bins when someone decided the paper was still good. Those were the battered ones. The ones with fingerprints ground into the cover. The ones that opened to the same spreads because somebody had already learned the index by heart. And plenty of them were marked pencil circles around item numbers. A quick underline under a code size. A faint note beside a page, written like a reminder to self. Most customers did it. It meant shopping. It meant the catalog had been used the way it was meant to be used. In that mailroom, Linda's world was ounces, stamps, and initials. Everything else was somebody else's problem. The supervisor's office sat behind glass with Venetian blinds. From the scale, Linda could see his shoes when he stood up. She could see the way he leaned over the ledger when the totals came in. The ledger mattered because the ledger could make a short week look clean. It could make a messed up route look like a routine fluctuation. And it could make a clerk look careless without raising anyone else's name. Linda watched him fix things the way managers fix things. Not with a conversation. With pencil, a line would get a small correction. A weight would become round. A smudged stamp would be traced darker. Nothing dramatic. But it made her careful in a different way. If she made one obvious mistake, it would stand alone on the page. Mid-morning, she pulled a batch for a suburban route and saw yesterday's P.O. box again. Same zip code. Same clean black label. She didn't stop the line. She slid it onto the scale like everything else. Eyes forward, hands practiced. The needle settled where it should. That was the first relief. Then she flipped the catalog open by accident, just enough to catch the center pages. A customer's pencil circles sat on a grid of item numbers, shoes, heaters, a set of towels. The marks were neat, almost too neat. She shut it and stamped the slip. Sometimes, the mailroom let you believe there was a harmless explanation for everything. Bad scales. Heavy glue in the spine. A rerouted sack with extra inserts. Even the smell could be explained away if you tried. The label machine used adhesive. The return station used paste. A carton could pick up odors from the dock. But the job trained her to trust paper more than people. Paper held weight. Paper held stamps. Paper held a trail. She kept her own quiet trail. The kind a clerk keeps without calling it evidence. A mental list of oddities that didn't belong to her, but might land on her anyway. By lunch, her forearms were gray with dust again. She ate a sandwich at the edge of the loading bay where the air was colder and the noise thinned. A truck backed in, beeping, and the dock plates clanged like loose metal teeth. The grounding truth didn't change. Linda moved catalogs out of Chicago, and her paycheck depended on speed. If the numbers went wrong, it would be her name on the line. When she came back, the supervisor was in the aisle, close enough that she could smell his aftershave over the paper. He didn't ask how her morning was going. He watched her hands. He watched her weigh. He watched her stamp. He watched her initial. Then he looked at the logbook and kept walking, like the book was a mirror, and he wanted to see what it reflected today. Near the end of the shift, a coworker pushed a returns cart past her station. Catalogs piled high, most with circles and quick notes, the ordinary kind of private planning. At the very top sat one with a new label, slapped crooked, across an old address. Linda reached out and straightened the label with her thumb. The paper lifted at the corner easier than it should have, like it had been peeled once already. She let it fall back into place. Small movements. No attention. At the time clock, she checked the overtime sheet again. Still blank where her name used to be. She stepped outside into the cold with her hands still smelling like paper and glue. Tomorrow would be another line of sacks, another set of weights, another chance to look careless. And the same P.O. box was already waiting in the bin. By the following week, Linda had stopped telling herself it was a one-off. Not out loud. Just in the way her hand paused before she wrote a number. The same P.O. box kept coming back through her station, dressed in the same clean label. The catalogs underneath were never the same condition. Some looked new. Some looked handled, but the weight drifted in the same direction. An ounce, then 2, then 1 afternoon. Enough to make the needle sit high, even after she reset the scale. She didn't announce it. She didn't call it a pattern. She just started weighing those books twice, like it was normal. Most late week afternoons, the mailroom shifted tone after lunch. The supervisors got jumpy. The dock got louder. The bins for certain routes would suddenly need to clear, as if the building itself had a schedule. Linda learned which sacks the foreman watched. She learned which ones he never touched. And she learned something else. The logbook could change while you weren't looking. One day, she returned from the restroom and found her last line written in darker pencil than she used. Her initials were there. The weight was not. It had been rounded down to a number that looked cleaner on the page. She stared at it long enough that her next stamp landed crooked. A small mistake. A loud one. A coworker named Ray leaned in from the next station and murmured, "You okay?" Linda kept her eyes on the sack. "If I'm not," she said, "I can't afford it." That was the whole truth in one sentence. She didn't have savings. She didn't have overtime anymore. She had rent due and a job that could make her look careless with a single line of pencil. Ray nodded like he understood, then glanced toward the glass office. He lowered his voice anyway. "Those P.O. boxes," he said, "they're special handling." Special how? Ray's mouth twitched, the way people do when they're trying not to commit to words. Just, they don't like questions, that's all. It wasn't an answer. It was a warning that pretended to be casual. Linda waited until Ray moved his cart away, then slid the next catalog under her palm. The spine resisted again. She bent it the way a reader bends a book. Gently. The cover gave, but not where it should have. Along the glue line, there was a faint ridge, like an old repair. And at the very bottom, near the last staple, she saw a thin seam that didn't match the factory fold. She closed it fast. A simple rule held the room together. Don't damage merchandise. If you damaged it, you ate the cost. Or you ate the blame. Still, the seam stayed in her mind while her hands kept moving. Stamp. Initial. Slide. By the time the afternoon push started, her station felt too exposed. Like the scale itself was listening. That's when the supervisor came out of the glass office and stopped behind her. He didn't say her name at first. He just watched the needle settle. Linda kept her face neutral and wrote the weight she saw. Then she wrote it again on the slip, slower, as if carefulness could protect her. The supervisor reached over and tapped the page of the logbook with one finger. "That number," he said, "doesn't make sense." Linda looked up. "It's what it weighs." "They don't mind, dear." He smiled without warmth. "Scales drift," he said. "People drift. Paper's paper." Then he turned the logbook toward her and pointed at a different line, her initials, again, beside the P.O. box entry from yesterday. The weight was rounded. The stamp looked darker than hers. "See," he said, as if he was helping her. "We keep it tidy." Tidy. As if the issue was handwriting, not ounces. Linda felt the trap close without any dramatic sound. If she argued, she'd be the problem clerk. If she stayed quiet, her name would stay attached to numbers she didn't write. She chose the quiet that kept the line moving. "I'll recalibrate at the end," she said. "Good," he replied. "And don't get creative with the ledger." He walked away, leaving aftershave and a new kind of pressure. A grounding thought cut through everything else. She was still weighing catalogs for a living. The only difference was she'd started noticing who was touching the numbers. Near closing, she checked the bin again and saw one more of the same labeled books waiting. This one had a penciled circle inside the front cover, an item number, neat as a coordinate. Linda stared at it, then at the stiff spine, then at the darkened logbook lines with her initials. She didn't open the catalog. Not yet. But she slid it onto the scale, watched the needle climb, and realized she wasn't alone in this room's quiet. Someone else was counting, too. On Thursday, the room cleared the same root bins faster than the others. Linda didn't notice at first because the mailroom was designed to erase days. Same carts, same dust, same stamps. But she began to feel it in her body the way the foreman's voice sharpened around 2 o'clock, the way a certain canvas sack always got tied with fresh twine, and the P.O. box labels kept showing up right before that push. She started tracking them the only way she safely could. In her head, in stolen glances, in the order the sacks left the dock. The labeled catalogs clustered. Not by condition, by timing. When she weighed them, she did it the way she trained herself to do it now twice. Needle, reset. Needle again. The wrong was consistent. That consistency was its own kind of proof. Not courtroom proof, mailroom proof. The kind you felt in the math of your hands. One afternoon, a cart of order inserts came rolling by thin bundles meant to go out with certain shipments. Linda watched the bundles pass, and something clicked. The smell. Rubber cement didn't belong to the label machine. The label machine's adhesive was dull and sweet, like tape. Rubber cement was sharper. It clung. It meant somebody had opened something and wanted it to look sealed again. When the next P.O. box catalog hit her station, she didn't open it like a reader. She handled it like a package. She held the spine under the light and rotated it slowly. Near the bottom, where the seam had bothered her before, the paper had a faint sheen like it had been dampened and pressed. Along the inside edge, she spotted a hair-thin line of dried adhesive that didn't match factory glue. It wasn't a repair. It was a reclose. She felt her pulse rise and forced her hands to stay steady. In that room, shaking meant guilt. She weighed it. 2 ounces heavy. Twice. 2 ounces. Again. She stamped the slip and watched the supervisor through the glass. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the dock. Like he cared less about the number and more about the moment the sack left the building. Linda didn't have a notebook. Not a real one. But she had her own tiny method. She memorized the zip codes and the rhythm they arrived in. 2 weeks became 3. 3 became a month. It wasn't just one P.O. box anymore. It was a chain. Different P.O. boxes, same formatting, same black label font, same clean corners, same kind of new on a worn cover. And the shipping stamps told a story if you knew how to read them. Not where the catalog ended, but where it passed through. A few always routed the same way, dock to local, sort to a neighborhood station that served laundromats, check cashers, cheap diners, places where nobody asked what you were carrying because everyone was carrying something. Linda didn't know the neighborhood's name, but she recognized it in the stamp codes and the driver schedules. A triangle of stops that repeated like a song chorus. Thursday afternoons. The same window. She tested herself. On a Tuesday, she watched the bins and waited to see if the P.O. box labels appeared. They didn't. On Wednesday, one showed up late, almost like an afterthought. It weighed normal. Thursday, 2 o'clock. Like clockwork, there were 3. The room didn't announce it. No one said, "Here comes the special batch." But the foreman suddenly wanted those sacks tied first, stacked first, rolled out first. Linda caught Ray again by the break table and tried to make her voice sound like paper talk. "Do you know where those zip codes run?" she asked, as if she was curious about routes for its own sake. Ray didn't answer right away. He stirred powdered creamer into coffee that didn't smell like coffee. "You asking because you're bored," he said. "I'm asking because my initials keep landing on their line," Linda replied. Ray's eyes flicked to the glass office, then away. "It's not your problem," he said, softer. "And if you make it your problem, you'll have more than overtime missing." Linda felt something cold settle behind her ribs. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ray shook his head once. A small, exhausted motion. "It means some folks don't work for Sears," he said. "Not really. That's one as the this side is in nothing by four." He walked out before she could ask the next question. That night, Linda rode the bus home with the smell of paper still on her hands. Her apartment felt too quiet, like the world outside had moved on without her. She tried to convince herself to stop noticing, stop weighing twice, stop scanning stamps, stop making patterns out of dust. But she couldn't, because the ledger had already changed once with her initials on it, because the supervisor had already warned her not to get creative, because the catalogs weren't just going out, they were being shepherded. By the next Thursday, she had decided something she hated about herself. She was going to follow one, not report it, not confront anyone, just see. Near the end of the shift, she watched the special sacks load onto a truck that left 5 minutes earlier than the rest. She watched the driver slam the door and pull away. And then she watched the supervisor watch it leave. That look wasn't managerial. It was protective. Linda clocked out and stepped into the cold, heart ticking fast enough to feel like a mistake. She didn't have a car. She didn't have authority. She had a bus pass and stubbornness. She took a route she didn't normally take toward the stamp station code she'd memorized, toward the neighborhood her mailroom stamps had been pointing to for weeks. If she was wrong, she'd waste an evening. If she was right, she would finally learn what the extra ounces were buying. And somewhere inside that stiff spine, sealed shut with rubber cement and routine, something was waiting to be picked up. On Thursday afternoons, the room moved like it had a private clock. Not a real one, a lived one. The same bins got emptied first. The same canvas sacks got fresh twine. The same supervisor drifted out of the glass office and stood where he could see the dock door. Linda had started recognizing it the way you recognize an oncoming headache. You don't announce it. You just tighten your shoulders and keep working. The P.O. box labels arrived before the push, not every day, not at random. They showed up when the room got impatient, when carts started piling, and the foreman's voice sharpened into that flat, managerial cheer. "Keep the line moving. Don't stall. Don't make me come over there." End quote. Linda slid the next catalog onto the scale and did what she trained herself to do. Weigh, reset, weigh again. The needle sat high. A little, but steady. She didn't look at the supervisor first. She looked at her own hands, because that's where blame always landed. Then she inhaled without meaning to. Rubber cement, not tape, not machine adhesive. Rubber cement was the smell of something opened on purpose, and then resealed by someone who knew the difference. Linda kept her face blank. In that room, expression was evidence. She rotated the catalog under the fluorescent light, slow enough to look casual. The cover was worn, but the label was crisp and new. Fresh corners on paper stuck to a tired spine. The spine resisted when she tried to flex it, not like a book that hadn't been read, like a book that didn't want to be read again. A seam ran along the bottom edge, hair thin, too straight to be accidental. She stamped the slip and slid the book into the outgoing sack, because the mailroom's first rule still owned her. Nothing stops the line. But the second rule was forming quietly inside her. If her initials stayed on these entries, she needed to know what the entries were hiding. By the end of the week, it wasn't one P.O. box anymore. It was a cluster. Different boxes, different zip codes, same formatting, same font on the labels, like they were printed from the same plate. And the weights drifted in the same direction. 1 ounce, 2 ounces, always enough to notice, never enough to call a crime. That was the genius of it, she realized. Not genius like a movie. Genius like a petty thief who knows exactly how much you can steal before anyone audits the drawer. The mailroom had its own kind of map, not street names, stamp codes, routing marks, a battered ink pad that left half moons on paper when you hit it too hard. Linda started reading those marks the way a bartender reads faces, not because she wanted to, because she had to. She noticed how the P.O. box sacks always got the same first leg out of the building. Dock to local sort. Local sort to a neighborhood station that served places with no waiting rooms and no questions. Laundromats. Check cash windows. Corner diners where people paid in crumpled bills and didn't make eye contact. She didn't know the streets, but she knew the rhythm. Every Thursday afternoon, the sacks left a little early. Every Thursday afternoon, the supervisor watched them go. Linda tried to prove herself wrong. On Tuesday, she watched the bins like a bored clerk, with nothing better to do. No P.O. box cluster, nothing stiff-spined, nothing that smelled sharp. On Wednesday, one catalog showed up with the familiar label. It weighed normal, almost like a decoy. Then Thursday came, and the pattern returned with confidence. 3 P.O. box catalogs in one batch, all 3 heavy. All 3 with labels that looked too new for what they were stuck to. Linda weighed each one twice, not because she thought the second reading would change, but because the second reading made her feel less crazy. The needle told the same truth both times. The foreman came down the aisle and barked, "Those sacks get tied first, not the others." Linda's stomach tightened. This was no longer a private oddity. It was a priority. She caught Ray at the break table again, where the coffee tasted like burnt water and the vending machine never returned exact change. She kept her voice low, like she was asking about shift swaps. "Those labels," she said. "They all look like they came from the same place." Ray didn't answer immediately. He stirred powdered creamer until the surface went pale. "You trying to get your overtime back?" he asked. "I'm trying not to get blamed for something I didn't do," Linda said. Ray's eyes flicked toward the glass office, then toward the dock. He lowered his voice so far it almost vanished. "Some folks don't work for Sears," he said again. "Not really." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're going to get from me," he said. And his tone wasn't cruel. It was scared. He walked out with his coffee like he needed the warmth in his hands. Linda stood there with a paper cup and a feeling she couldn't file away. If Ray was right, if somebody in her building answered to something other than a supervisor, then every quiet choice she'd made was already part of it. Back at the scale, the room's noise pressed in again. Rollers. Staples. Cards. Linda forced herself into the simplest version of her life. I weigh catalogs. I stamp slips. I go home. But the pattern wouldn't let her stay simple, because the ledger kept cleaning itself. A weight she wrote down would get rounded later. A stamp would appear darker the next day. Her initials stayed steady as a fingerprint, while the numbers shifted around them. She started watching the logbook like it was a living thing. When the supervisor stepped away, she leaned in just enough to catch the pressure marks on the page. Indented lines. Ghostwriting. Someone had erased and rewritten without changing the shape of the paper. That detail hit her in a humiliating way. This wasn't just secretive. It was practiced. And then, late Thursday, the personal cost finally stopped being abstract. Linda went to her locker before clockout and saw it half open. Not wide, just a crack. Her lock was still looped through the latch, but the metal felt warmer than it should have, like someone else's hand had been there. Inside, her apron was folded too neatly. Linda didn't fold neatly. Her bus pass was still in her wallet. Her cigarettes were still there. Nothing obvious missing. Then she saw the smallest thing. A plain key tag, one of those cheap plastic tags, with a number stamped into it, sat on top of her lunch bag. It wasn't hers. Her tag was red and scratched up, the number almost worn away. This one was clean white, like it had never been on a ring. She picked it up and turned it over. On the back, written in faint pencil, was a short line, no signature, no threat you could quote to anyone without sounding ridiculous. Stop weighing twice. Linda's mouth went dry. Someone had been close enough to her things to leave a message that looked like nothing. Someone had chosen pencil because pencil erased, and pencil belonged in a mailroom. She stood there too long, trying to decide what this meant without letting her face change. A prank would have been louder. A prank would have had a name attached to it. This was quiet. This was control. Linda closed the locker and walked to the time clock like her legs still belonged to her. She punched out, and the machine clacked the card with indifferent force. Outside, the air cut sharp through her coat. Her bus was already at the stop, doors folding shut. She ran not far, just enough to feel ridiculous, and slapped the side of the bus as it pulled away. The driver didn't look back. Linda stood on the curb with her breath showing and that white key tag warm in her fist. Time had done what it always did to people like her. It narrowed the choices. She could go home and pretend the note never happened. Or she could do the thing she'd been thinking about for weeks, the thing that would cross her from noticing into acting. She waited for the next bus with the smell of rubber cement still in her nose, rehearsing how to look ordinary. And she kept turning the clean white tag over and over, like it might explain itself. The next Thursday, Linda didn't wait twice. Not at first. She stood at her station with the clean white key tag in her pocket, fingers resting on the edge of the scale like it was hot. She watched the needle. She wrote the number once. Then the P.O. Box catalog came through anyway. Same new label, same stiff spine, same sharp glue smell that didn't belong in a room full of paper. Linda stared at it one beat longer than she should have, and that was enough. The supervisor's shoes shifted behind her. Not close, just present. She wrote the weight she was expected to write. Clean, tidy, rounded. The sack got tied with fresh twine. The foreman waved it forward like it was late for something. The dock door swallowed it. And Linda clocked out with her hands still smelling like adhesive. Outside, she made herself look ordinary. That meant two things: no rushing and no looking back. She walked to the bus stop like she was going home. When the bus arrived, she climbed on and dropped her coins into the fare box without counting them. A few stops later, she pulled the cord and got off early. The neighborhood station the stamps had been pointing to wasn't dramatic. It was just brick and fluorescent light, and people waiting with packages they didn't want to carry anymore. A line of mailboxes. A bulletin board with curling notices. A wall clock that made a soft, tired tick. Linda stood near the far window like she had a reason to be there. She didn't. She watched the employees in uniform roll canvas sacks through a back door. She watched which ones got signed for fast and which ones got weighed again. One sack hers, she was sure it didn't touch a scale at all. A man in a plain jacket took it as if he belonged. No clipboard, no argument. He nodded once at the counter and carried it out with a grip that said he'd done it before. Linda followed at a distance that felt stupid and necessary. He didn't go to a car. He walked 3 blocks and turned into a laundromat. It was the kind with yellowed folding tables and detergent stacked behind the register. Coin machines lined up like soldiers. A radio played low enough to be ignored. The air smelled like hot fabric and old soap. Linda took a seat on a plastic chair near the front, like she was waiting for a wash cycle that didn't exist. She kept her hands in her lap. She kept her face empty. The man with the sack didn't head for the washers. He went straight to a back corner where a payphone hung on the wall. He set the sack down beside it and made a call that lasted less than a minute. Then he opened the sack. Not wide, just enough. He slid one Sears catalog out and held it against his forearm like a newspaper. He flipped it open once, fast, and Linda saw the pencil circles, neat marks on item numbers like coordinates. He closed it. He weighed it. A second man came in, older, carrying a mesh bag of clothes. He looked like every tired commuter in the city. He nodded at nobody. He fed quarters into a washer without checking the price. Then he walked to the folding table and set his mesh bag down beside the catalog. The first man didn't hand the book over like a secret. He slid it across the table like a mistake. The second man slid something back. Not an envelope. Not a briefcase. A money order stub, folded small. Linda saw it because the paper flashed pale under the lights before it disappeared into the first man's pocket. The exchange was over in 3 seconds. The first man picked up the sack and left. The second man stayed, started folding clothes that weren't dry yet, like he needed to look busy. Linda kept sitting. This was the part she hadn't planned for. The proof that didn't look like proof. No guns, no shouting, just paper changing hands in a room where everyone had paper. She waited until the first man was gone. Then she stood and walked to the vending machine like she wanted gum. She didn't buy anything. She just angled herself toward the trash can beside it. There, on top of lint and empty detergent boxes, sat a torn strip of money order receipt paper. The amount was printed in black. Small, regular payments. Not enough to be rich. Enough to be steady. Enough to be worth repeating. Linda didn't take it. Not yet. Because the second man was still there. He had the catalog now. He set it on the folding table, opened it to the same marked page, and ran his finger down the circled item numbers as if he was counting. Page, line, item. His lips moved once, silently. Then he closed the book and tucked it under his mesh bag. Linda's throat tightened, but she didn't name the feeling. She just noticed what her body did. She stopped breathing for a moment, then forced air back in through her nose. This was real, and she was sitting 10 feet away from it. She needed something she could carry out of the room without anyone saying her name. A damaged catalog would do. At 6:12 p.m., a kid ran in with a basket of socks, bumped the folding table, and the catalog slid off the edge. It hit the floor spine first with a dull crack. The second man cursed under his breath, picked it up, and checked the cover like a store clerk inspecting merchandise. The spine had split a little, not enough to spill anything, enough to be a problem. He looked around once, not panicked, just annoyed. Then he dropped the catalog into the trash can like it was ruined inventory. Linda watched the book land, half covered by lint, and she made the choice that turned her from observer into participant. She walked to the trash can, slow. She bent down, slower. She lifted the catalog like she was doing the laundromat a favor, like she planned to put it somewhere cleaner. No one stopped her. No one asked. That was the worst part, how easy it was. Outside, the air felt colder. The catalog pressed against her coat like it had weight beyond paper. She walked 3 blocks before she allowed herself to look down at it. The split spine showed the faintest seam. A second layer under the first. Rubber cement? Again, back on the bus, she kept the catalog on her lap and stared out the window like she was carrying groceries. She didn't go to the police. She didn't call a union rep. She went home, closed her apartment door, and set the catalog on her kitchen table. Then she took a butter knife from the drawer because it was the most ordinary blade she owned and slid it into the split seam. The spine resisted, and something inside resisted back. The butter knife didn't slice paper. It slipped, then snagged. Linda held the catalog flat with her left hand and worked the blade into the split like she was opening a glued envelope. The kitchen light pooled on the table. The rest of the apartment stayed dark. The spine gave a soft crackle, not tearing, separating. A second layer of cardboard appeared under the cover stock. Whoever built it had shaved the inside down and glued it back together with care. It wasn't a child's hiding place. It was clean work. Linda eased the seam wider. Something inside moved. Not alive. Just spring-loaded by tight packing. A thin strip slid out, curled like a fingernail clipping. Clear plastic, tiny dark rectangles along it, frames smaller than postage stamps. Microfilm, the kind she'd only seen in movies and old news photos. Taped to the film was a sliver of onion skin paper, folded into a hard crease. No letterhead. Just columns of numbers, typed faintly, and one handwritten line in pencil at the top. Age, line, item. Linda didn't read further, because she suddenly understood why the pencil circles mattered. Those circled item numbers weren't shopping notes. They were coordinates. A shared book anyone could buy. Thick enough to hide a strip of film, ordinary enough to travel across the country without raising an eyebrow. She sat back, knife still in her hand, and stared at the catalog like it had changed shape. This was the truth the room had been carrying. Not fraud. Not theft. A system. The phone on her counter was beige and heavy. The cord had a kink from years of being stretched. She reached for it, then stopped. Calling the police sounded like the right thing. It also sounded like a way to become the first suspect. So she made the choice she'd been making for months, half safety, half delay. She put the microfilm back inside the spine, pressed the seam closed with her thumb, and wrapped the catalog in a dish towel like it was hot. Then she went downstairs and walked 3 blocks to a payphone outside a corner grocery. Her fingers smelled like rubber cement. She flipped through the torn edge of the phone book where government listings lived. FBI, postal inspectors, federal building. She didn't have a script. She had a catalog and a bad feeling. When a man answered, Linda didn't say spy. She didn't say Soviet. She said the only words she trusted. I work in a mailroom, she told him. I found microfilm in outgoing printed material. There was a pause. That wasn't confusion. It was calculation. "Where are you calling from?" he asked. Linda looked at the street like it could overhear. "A payphone," she said. "Chicago." "Well, Banner." Another pause. "Do you still have the item?" the man asked. "I can put it back," Linda said, and hated how small she sounded. "Do not put it back," he replied. "Do not bring it to your workplace. Go home, lock your door, someone will contact you." Linda hung up and stood there with the receiver cold against her palm, listening to the line go dead. On the walk home, she didn't look over her shoulder. Not because she was brave, because she didn't want to confirm anything. By the time she reached her building, a dark sedan sat at the curb with the engine running. The driver's window was down a crack, cigarette smoke slipping out in thin, controlled breaths. A man stepped out when she hit the sidewalk. He wasn't in a suit. He wasn't in uniform. He held up a wallet like it was a gesture he'd practiced 1,000 times. He spoke her name once. That was how she knew the call had reached the right place. Up in her apartment, Linda placed the catalog on the table and unwrapped it like evidence. The man didn't touch it yet. He looked at her hands first, like he was checking for glue. He asked short questions. Where did it come from? Who handled those sacks? Who corrected your ledger entries? Who left the note? Linda didn't tell a story. She gave him the clean white key tag and let him read the pencil message. Stop weighing twice. The man didn't react. He just nodded once, as if the note completed a shape. A second man arrived with a small case and a clear plastic bag. They didn't dust for prints in front of her. They didn't dramatize anything. They cut the spine open with a tool that looked like it belonged in a watchmaker's kit and slid the microfilm into the bag without bending it. Then they unfolded the onion skin paper and copied the numbers onto a pad. One of them spoke softly, almost to himself. Codebook, he said. Public source. It's in Neverall 1. He didn't explain further. But Linda could see it now. The Sears catalog as a shared map. Page numbers as references. Item numbers as anchors. A way to turn ordinary shopping ink into a private language, one that didn't require a transmitter, a meeting, or a written address. The second man looked up at her. Do you recognize any of the names on the P.O. boxes? He asked. Linda shook her head. It's just labels, she said. They're always new. He wrote anyway. Then came the part that cost her. We need you to go to work, the first man said. We need you to behave normally. We need to see which sacks get treated differently. Linda stared at the table. Normal had already been taken from her. I can't, she said. They're watching my locker. The man didn't argue. He slid a card across the table with a phone number and told her to call if anyone spoke to her about the catalog. Then he added one line that landed heavier than the microfilm ever had. If your supervisor asks you anything, he said, you say nothing. The next day, Linda went in anyway. Because rent was rent. Because groceries didn't wait for counterintelligence. The mailroom smelled the same. The rollers spun. The carts squealed. People joked in half sentences, the way workers do when they're trying to make a shift go faster. But the supervisor was waiting in the aisle. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse her of anything you could report. He handed her a folded slip of paper, an incident notice, the kind that always looked official and meant you were already losing. Inventory discrepancy, it read. Policy breach. Removal of company property. Linda didn't defend herself. Any defense would be a confession to someone. She walked to her locker while he followed at a distance that felt intentional. Her apron was still folded too neatly. Her red key tag still hung where it always did, like a joke that had been waiting for her. At the dock, around mid-afternoon, the special sacks rolled out early. Just like always. Except this time, they didn't make it past the parking lot. Two unmarked cars slid in without sirens. Men stepped out with calm speed and moved straight toward the outgoing cart as if they'd rehearsed the path. The supervisor's face didn't change until the first set of hands went into the canvas sacks. Then his posture shifted, half protest, half retreat. A catalog came out, then another, then a third. The agents didn't open them in public. They bagged them, tagged them, and walked them back to the cars as if they were carrying glass. One agent turned and spoke to the supervisor in a low voice. The supervisor answered too fast, like he'd prepared excuses that didn't fit the question. Linda watched from her station with her hands flat on the table so nobody could say she reached for anything. Ray passed behind her once, slower than usual. He didn't look at her. He didn't speak. By closing, The supervisor's office was empty. The blinds hung crooked. A drawer sat half open, left that way on purpose or in a rush. Linda's time card was missing. Someone from payroll told her, without meeting her eyes, that her badge access was canceled. She was on suspension pending review, which sounded polite and meant you were already gone. On the walk home, she stopped at the same grocery payphone and called the number on the card. A different man answered this time. Your catalog batch is part of an espionage channel, he said, like he was reading weather. We've been watching the drop. The microfilm contains cipher material. Linda gripped the receiver harder. So what happens to me? She asked. There was another pause, and this one wasn't calculation. It was distance. You did the right thing, the man said finally. But you need to keep quiet. For a long time, Linda hung up and stood on the sidewalk with her paycheck already disappearing in her head. And in her pocket, the clean white key tag still felt warm. The butter knife didn't cut paper. It slipped, then caught. Linda held the catalog flat on her kitchen table and worked the blade into the split seam. The light above the stove made the glossy cover look innocent. Her apartment stayed quiet in the way cheap apartments do: thin walls, no privacy, no extra noise to hide behind. The spine gave a soft crackle. Not tearing, separating. Under the cover stock was a second layer thin cardboard, shaved down and glued back like a patch. Whoever did it knew how to make damage look like manufacturing. Linda widened the seam by millimeters. Something inside slid forward, springy from tight packing. Clear plastic, tiny dark rectangles along it, frames smaller than stamps. She didn't have the vocabulary for it at first, but she knew the shape. Microfilm. A strip of onion skin paper was taped to the plastic, folded hard into a narrow band. No logo, no greeting, just columns of numbers, faintly typed, and one handwritten line in pencil at the top. Page, line, item. Linda didn't read further. She didn't need to. The pencil circles she'd seen in those catalogs weren't shopping notes. They were coordinates, a shared book anyone could buy, a reference nobody would question, a way to turn consumer pages into a private map. She sat back and forced one breath through her nose. This was still her life. She still worked in a mailroom. Rent was still due. She put the microfilm back inside the spine and pressed the seam closed with her thumb until the glue caught again. Then she wrapped the catalog in a dish towel and carried it downstairs like she was taking out something fragile. 3 blocks away, outside a corner grocery, a payphone hung beside a faded poster for discount cigarettes. Linda flipped through the torn edge of the phone book where government listings lived. She found a federal number and dialed without giving herself time to rehearse. When a man answered, she didn't say spy. She didn't say Soviet. I work in a mailroom, she told him. I found microfilm inside outgoing printed material. Silence. Not confusion. Attention? Where are you? The man asked. A payphone. Chicago. Do you still have it? Yes. Don't take it to work, he said. Don't show it to anyone. Go home. Linda hung up and walked back with the receiver's cold shape still in her hand. A dark sedan was waiting near her building by the time she returned. The driver's window was cracked. Cigarette smoke leaked out in controlled breaths. A man stepped out, not in a suit, not in uniform, and held up a wallet like a practiced gesture. He said her name once. Upstairs, he didn't touch the catalog immediately. He looked at her hands first, like he expected glue. He asked short questions with no softness. Where did it come from? Which P.O. boxes? Who changed the ledger? Who left the note? Linda didn't give speeches. She gave logistics. She handed him the clean white key tag. He read the pencil message, stop weighing twice. He didn't react. He just tucked it away, like it completed something he already suspected. A second man arrived with a small case. He opened the catalog spine with a tool that looked too precise for paper and slid the microfilm into a clear bag without bending it. The onion skin strip followed, flattened, and copied. Public source codebook, one of them said, almost to himself. Linda heard it and understood the shape of the trick. A Sears catalog as the shared text. Page as a chapter. Line as a row. Item as a number that meant nothing until it meant everything. Then the first man told her what he needed next. We're going to hit the route, he said. We need your workplace to behave normally. I'm already suspended, Linda said, and the words tasted like metal. He nodded once, like that was the expected cost. Then you keep quiet, he said. If anyone asks you why, you say nothing. The next morning, Linda went in anyway, not to help, not to be brave, to collect her last pay stub and prove at least to herself that she hadn't imagined the last month of her life. The mailroom sounded the same. Rollers, carts, staples, somebody laughing too loud near the returns bins. But her supervisor was waiting in the aisle. He handed her a folded slip of paper, an incident notice, removal of company property, inventory discrepancy, language that made her the criminal without ever using the word. Linda didn't argue. Arguing required facts she wasn't allowed to share. By mid-afternoon, the special sacks rolled out early, just like always. Fresh twine, priority handling. The supervisor watched the cart like it belonged to him. The unmarked cars arrived without sirens. Men stepped out with calm speed and moved straight to the outgoing sacks. They didn't open anything in public. They bagged catalogs, tagged them, and carried them like glass. The supervisor tried to talk fast. Explanations. Procedures. Confusion. His hands moved too much. An agent leaned in and spoke to him low enough that Linda couldn't hear. The supervisor's posture changed after that, less managerial, more cornered. Ray walked past Linda's station once. He didn't look at her. He didn't speak. He just kept moving. Like the safest thing a coworker could do was pretend she didn't exist. At closing, payroll told Linda her badge access was canceled. Pending review? They said, eyes down. Outside, the air cut cold through her coat. She walked home with her last stub folded in her pocket, the kind of paper that proved you'd once belonged somewhere. And behind her, the dock door kept opening and closing.